All right, this is day 3 of trying to get the dice to animate. I actually already tried to make this video in class, but there's a lot of interruptions, so I have to rather just summarize what we covered and what we changed. So we're looking at trying to animate the dice. And so the first thing you have to do to animate the dice is we have to make a few changes to the dice frame class. The behavior, let me just show you the behavior so you can see what we're trying to do. The idea is we're trying to make the dice look like they're randomly generated, so you roll the dice, you flash a bunch of numbers on there, and then stop after about 5 frames. And then you can play as normal, and then it flashes some more, and then here, full house, yay, haven't got that done yet, but you can see how the animation is working. So the question is, how do you go about implementing that in your own code? Let's take a look. First thing, let's look at the bottom. Bottom's a good place to start. Here are the 4 things we needed to add right there. Let me see if I can zoom in a bit so we can see that a little easier. Okay, so here we're going to keep track of the frame number. What frame are you on? We're just calling it that. We want to generate 5 sets of random numbers each time they press the roll button. Then we have this new object that we haven't used before. It's a timer. It comes from the same library as our UI stuff. So we're using that timer to do our animation. And then we have a few constants that we've added. These aren't need to be available outside the class, so we make them private. Number of frames, that's how many times you want it to change numbers in the animation. And then the animation delay, I think that's in milliseconds. So there's that piece at the bottom. And then up at the top, we need to add this import for the timer, because we haven't used that before. And then a lot of people, this is unrelated, but a lot of people are struggling. They're getting some kind of exception. It's because we need to create our dice before we initialize our components, because our components, the dice toggle button uses the die, and so that die needs to be there when it gets created. So you got to move the game model, calling the game model constructor up to the top. Okay, so it's all the same. Here's the addition of the timer. Now the timer is kind of odd, to say the least. What you do here, and I don't quite understand this, but what's happening here is we have our animation timer. We create a new timer. You put in the animation delay, and then you figure you would instantiate an action listener, and that's what they do. They're just doing that right in the constructor for the timer, but then it gets really weird. You would expect that there'd be a closing parenthesis right here, but what they do is at the time you call the constructor, they also define or override the action perform event for the listener. And I've seen this once before, and like I said, I don't know what to call it. I gotta look that up, but it's very strange. Anyway, what's happening here is they're overriding the action perform method that's the default one for the action listener, and just putting it right here, right after the constructor. So very strange. What do we have to do when they hit the roll button? Well, we have to disable the roll button so they don't hit it while it's animating. And then we also have to disable the hold buttons to make sure that they can't click on those while it's animating. And then we've moved all the rolling code into this method. I'll show you what I mean in a second. I just call it manage roll button. Now, this is really confusing. We had some trouble with this yesterday. Right here, that is the close parenthesis for this call to this constructor. And so that's a parenthesis. Let's zoom in on that just to make sure it's a parenthesis. I'm zooming in. Yeah. So that one, that is a parenthesis. It goes with that parenthesis, not a curly brace. If you put a curly brace there, then everything blows up. It's really quite awful. Check this out. Curly brace. Yeah, and everything turns red. The whole project turns red. So don't do that. Make sure that's a parenthesis. Okay. All right. So that's a little bit strange, but we've tied this event handler, basically. Every time the timer goes off, they'll fire off this event. Here we have some of our helper functions, but if we look here at Manage Roll Button, this is where the stuff we used to have in our roll button. Let me just show you what our roll button is doing right now. Here's the button roll, and the only thing it does now is just start the animation timer. That actually starts the animation. So all the rolling stuff had to be moved into the code that's being called by the event handler for the timer. So now we go back up and we'll take a look at what we changed. So we added this new method, manage roll button, but copied this stuff in. This is just the standard stuff we were doing before. One thing we changed, we had the repaint inside of this loop and maybe inside of this if statement. We find that this is so fast that we can just repaint once. Have we satisfied this comment where I say, see if I can move this lower in the processing? I think we have. I've actually moved it higher because it's so fast, so I think we don't have to worry about that, but we might have to come back to that later. But then the new stuff, after we repaint all the buttons after we generate the next roll, then we increment the frame number, starts out at 0, and if the frame number is greater than or equal to the number of frames, then we want to stop the animation. So we stop the animation, we reset the frame number back to 0, and then we enable all the hold buttons. And then we do our standard stuff we were doing at the bottom. We're going to throw in some exception handling here at some point, but right now we're just, if we were at before the first roll, then we go to before the second roll and that kind of stuff. We're just following the finite state machine at that point. So, yeah, it'll do this 5 times. On the 5th time, it'll generate dice rolls for the ones that aren't being held, and then on the 5th time, it'll stop the timer, and then the calls to this method stop as well. And then whatever's showing on the screen at that point becomes the player's roll. So it's kind of weird, but every time they roll, they're actually rolling 5 times. We're only letting them have the last one, though. Okay, so that was a big change. We also found we had to add a few things here. See, all right, so we're looking at what do we added here. Because we're disabling the roll button while it's animating, we have to enable it once we get to these states. So we've added, I think this was already there, but this one perhaps wasn't there, and certainly this wasn't there. So make sure you add those to your code as well. There's still some discussion on the scoring state. I'm not quite sure if I understand it completely, but some students are saying this is unnecessary, this state. I have a feeling that I put it there for a reason. I just can't remember the reason, so I'll have to think about that. Everything else, let me just stroll through the code. Here's our 3 of a kind and 4 of a kind scoring thing. There's Yahtzee. Those 3 are done. And then we've done the upper scoring categories. Chance is done, which is good. Here, it's just a generic function for any of the upper scoring categories. Here, update upper score cat. So we go into the scoring state. Then we update the category, or that category in the, I don't know, I guess the game has already calculated it. Oh, that's what this method does, is calculates that category and puts it in the sum, and then the sum gets on the screen. And then manage UI state. Now here is a to-do because we have to check to see if there's any more unused scoring categories at this point. Right now we're just going to before the first roll. So this is where we have to detect end of game. So we'll have to fix that later. And then here's our main method. That didn't change. And then the stuff here. So that's our code right now. Did we change anything in the die class? We did add one thing. Okay, and the one thing we added was Let me zoom here so we can see it. Yeah, you may not need to add it, but it was something like, yeah, this one, set value. It's strange that you would put a set value function here. Usually with a dice, you roll it to change the value. But here, what we're doing is, if you look at the draw event of the die, let's see if it's there. Where's the draw event? Now, that draw event is in that die six-sided. So that's a base class. So let me zoom in here too. And then, not sure what happened there. Yeah, I accidentally clicked on something. Okay, so here, we made a few changes. We added, we moved this up to make it a constant, and it's a class level constant. So we say private final int unit, all caps, and our dice faces are 60 by 60, and we divide that by 4, and that gives us 3 columns or 3 lines in the middle of the die. Maybe you could think of it as a 3 by 3 grid of lines, or maybe a 4 by 4 grid of cubes or something like that. Our side length is 60, that's why I use 60 up here. Probably would be better to use a constant there as well. But we'll just leave it for now. Well, that kind of bothers me, so I better fix that. So what I'm going to do is, excuse me, make another constant. And we'll call this one side. This is the side length in pixels. And we'll set that equal to 60. And then instead of using 60 here, we'll just say side. So that gives you that. Now we'll get rid of side here, because we don't need it in the draw event. And then we'll use our constant here. And then I think we're good after that. Okay. So another thing we did yesterday is our draw event was kind of a mess in that we had a lot of repetitive code. All this stuff is the same, let's say. Let me get rid of some of this empty space. But the idea here is we're just creating one circle, moving it around, and drawing it. Here's the tricky part. If the value of the die happens to be 0, which is I guess the initial state of the die when the game first starts, then it doesn't draw anything, which is what we want, because you haven't rolled anything, and it makes the die face look blank. It's kind of kludgy, because 0 is not a valid roll for a die, but we're kind of using that to clear our die, which is probably not good, but that's what we're doing, I guess. So that's why that case is in there, and I put that comment in there because we want to have, there are times in the game where we want the die face to be clear, and so we're using a value of 0 to do that. Then, before we had this big mess of code where there's a lot of repetitive code, and so what we did is we broke down each little pips location into its own, or maybe, yeah, its own little drawing thing. So when you draw a 1, you're drawing the middle center pip. When you're drawing the 2, you're doing the top right and the bottom left. If you're drawing a 3, well, you do top right, bottom left, and the middle, right? And so you already have those methods declared or created up here, let's say. You can use those to make the 3, and then the 4, we do top left and bottom right with the 2, whatever we're doing for 2. 5, we do the middle this time, and 6, there's a new one. So what we did is make these little methods that draw these 3 sets, or these 4 different configuration of pips. So this is just the middle. This is top right, bottom left. Those usually happen in pairs. Top left, bottom right, they also get drawn together. And then middle left, middle right. That's only when you roll a 6 where you need this one. But we use our unit. We use some fancy math. But you can, now I think it looks a lot cleaner. And we can draw that 6-sided die, which is even better. And so that was basically it. I don't think we did anything to the dice class. Just double check. Let me just double check to see if anything happened to the dice class. Roll didn't change. Roll die. Add them up. Nope. 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 Yeah. So that didn't change at all. So we're good. Good there. The game model didn't change either. So what more do we still have to do? Well, we have a lot more scoring categories to fill in, and then we have to do some subtotaling and grand totaling, and then detecting end of game. After that, we're going to enhance it. We have a milestone to turn in, and then after that, we're perhaps going to add high score, keeping track of high scores, and then some exception handling as well. And then that'll probably do it for this project and also for the school year. So hopefully we can get this done. All right, thanks everyone.